Hello everyone, welcome back to Fluent English. We're so happy you're here with us today. Whether you're listening on your way to work, studying at home, or practicing your English during a break, thank you for joining us.
Hey everyone, it's great to have you back. I don't know about you, but I've been hearing English learners ask about today's topic all the time. It's one of those small words that seems simple, but it's actually used in so many different ways.
That's so true. I remember when I was learning another language, there was always one little word that appeared everywhere. I understood it in one situation, but then I'd hear it used differently and think, wait, what does it mean this time?
Exactly, and today's word is one of those powerful little words. We're talking about would. If you've ever felt confused by would, don't worry, you're definitely not alone.
By the end of this episode, you'll understand how native speakers use would in real conversations. You'll learn how to talk about imaginary situations, make polite requests, express preferences, and sound much more natural in everyday English.
And here's something important. Native speakers use would constantly. You'll hear it at work, in restaurants, when talking with friends, and even when making plans for the future.
So if you've ever wondered why people say things like, I would love to, would you mind, or I would go if I had time, you're in the right place.
Before we begin, we have a question for you. What's the most confusing sentence you've heard with the word would? Leave your answer in the comments. We'd love to see your examples.
And if you're enjoying Fluent English and want more practical lessons that help you sound natural, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to Fluent English, and share it with a friend who's learning English too.
All right, let's jump right in and start mastering would in real conversations.
Let's begin with the most important use of would. When many learners first hear this word, they think it's only the past form of will. While that's sometimes true, would does much more than that.
Right, a simple way to think about it is this. Would often talks about possibilities, imagined situations, preferences, or polite communication.
Here's a useful structure. Subject plus would plus base verb, for example. I would go, she would help, they would buy it, we would stay.
Let's look at a few real examples. I would travel more if I had more money. She would call you if she knew your number. They would join us if they weren't busy. We would eat outside if the weather were better. He would buy that car if it were cheaper.
Notice something interesting. In all of these examples, the action isn't happening right now. We're imagining a situation. For example, I often say, I would live near the beach if I could. The truth is, I don't live near the beach. It's just something I imagine.
I do that too. I sometimes say, I would sleep until noon every day if I didn't have work.
And honestly, I think a lot of listeners would agree with that one.
Probably. Let me ask you something. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
That's a good question. I would probably live somewhere with mountains and great coffee shops. What about you?
I would choose a city where I could walk everywhere. No traffic, no long commutes.
Listeners, think about your answer. Where would you live if you could choose any place in the world? Write your answer in the comments.
This is actually a great way to practice would. Ask yourself imaginary questions. What would you do with $1 million? What would you eat every day if calories didn't exist? What would your dream job be?
These questions help train your brain to use would naturally. Now let's talk about negative forms. The structure is subject plus would not plus base verb, or more naturally, subject plus wouldn't plus base verb.
Here are some examples. I wouldn't do that. She wouldn't agree. They wouldn't believe it. We wouldn't leave early. He wouldn't spend that much money.
Native speakers almost always use wouldn't in conversation because it sounds smoother and more natural. For example, I wouldn't buy that phone. I wouldn't stay there. I wouldn't worry too much.
Let's practice together. Can you say, I wouldn't eat pizza every day? Good, now try, I wouldn't quit my job without a plan. Excellent.
Here's another useful pattern, would plus subject plus base verb. This is how we form questions. Would you help me? Would they come? Would she enjoy that movie? Would he understand?
You'll hear these questions all the time. Would you try skydiving? Would you move to another country? Would you learn another language? Would you work remotely forever?
Listeners, answer these questions out loud. Don't just think about them. Speaking out loud is one of the fastest ways to improve your fluency.
And remember, don't worry about perfection. The goal is communication.
Another thing learners often notice is that would frequently appears with if. For example, if I had more time, I would exercise more. If she were here, she would know what to do. If they invited us, we would go.
That's one of the most common patterns in English. If plus situation would plus result, you'll hear it everywhere.
Before we finish this section, here's a challenge. Complete these sentences. If I had an extra day every week, I would. If I could speak any language perfectly, I would. If I won the lottery, I would. Leave one of your answers in the comments.
Great job! In this section, we learned the basic structure of would, how to create positive, negative, and question forms, and how to use it for imagined situations. That's the foundation you'll need for everything else we're covering today.
Now that we've covered the basic idea of would for imaginary situations, let's build on that foundation and look at another extremely common use. This is one of the reasons native speakers use would all day long.
That's right, we're talking about using would for polite requests, polite offers, and expressing preferences. If you want to sound friendly and natural, this section is for you.
One thing you'll notice is that English speakers often choose would because it sounds softer and more polite than direct language. For example, compare these two sentences. Give me the menu. Would you give me the menu, please?
The second one sounds much more polite, doesn't it? Let's look at a simple pattern. Would you plus base verb. Examples: would you help me? Would you open the window? Would you explain that again? Would you send me the file?
You'll hear these questions at work, in restaurants, in stores, and even between friends. For example, if I'm in a coffee shop, I might say, would you tell me which drink is most popular? Or if I'm working with someone, I might say, would you check this email before I send it?
Here's another very common pattern. Would you mind plus verbing? Examples: would you mind closing the door? Would you mind speaking a little slower? Would you mind helping me with this?
This structure is extremely polite. In fact, many learners are surprised when they first hear it because the answer can feel a little different. For example, would you mind opening the window? A natural response could be, not at all. Or, sure, no problem.
Exactly, you're saying you don't mind doing it. Now let's move to another popular use of would, expressing preferences. The structure is I would like, or the contraction I'd like.
Native speakers use this constantly. I'd like a coffee, please. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to learn more about that. I'd like to visit Japan someday.
Notice how natural that sounds. If you walk into a restaurant and say, I want a coffee, people will understand you, but I'd like a coffee sounds more polite and more natural.
That's a great point. Many learners overuse want because it's simple, but native speakers often use would like when making requests. For example, I'd like a table for two. I'd like some information about the course. I'd like to schedule a meeting.
Let's do a quick comparison. More direct, I want a glass of water. More polite, I'd like a glass of water. More direct, I want to speak to the manager. More polite, I'd like to speak to the manager.
Here's a useful tip. When you're unsure how to ask for something politely, try using I'd like. It's simple, professional, and appropriate in almost every situation.
Let's practice. Imagine you're ordering food. Instead of saying, I want a sandwich, try saying, I'd like a sandwich, please.
Excellent. Now imagine you're at a hotel. Instead of, I want a room, say, I'd like a room for 2 nights.
Much more natural. And listeners, here's a challenge. Think of 3 things you'd like to do this year. Maybe you'd like to travel. Maybe you'd like to improve your English. Maybe you'd like to start a new hobby. Write one example in the comments.
Now let's look at another structure. Would rather. This is used to express preference between options. The pattern is subject plus would rather plus base verb.
Here are some examples. I'd rather stay home. I'd rather watch a movie. She'd rather drive. They'd rather wait. We'd rather leave early.
I use this expression all the time. For example, I'd rather read a book than watch television. Or I'd rather walk than sit in traffic.
Same here. I'd rather cook at home than order takeout. It's a very natural expression.
Let's do a little conversation. I'd rather go to the beach this weekend.
Really, I'd rather go hiking.
See how easy that is? Native speakers use would rather in everyday conversations constantly.
Let's compare formality. Formal, I would prefer to discuss this tomorrow. Neutral, I'd like to discuss this tomorrow. Casual, I'd rather talk about it tomorrow.
All 3 are correct. The difference is mainly tone and situation. At work you might hear I would prefer. With friends you'll hear I'd rather.
Now let's do a quick practice activity. I'll give a situation and you create a sentence with would. Ready? You're ordering dinner.
A possible answer, I'd like the chicken, please.
Great, you're asking a coworker for help.
Would you help me with this report?
Excellent, you're choosing between 2 movies.
I'd rather watch the comedy.
Perfect.
Before we move on, here are 3 important tips. First, use would to sound more polite. Second, use I'd like when requesting something. Third, use I'd rather when expressing preferences.
And don't forget to practice these expressions in real life. Even simple situations like ordering coffee or asking a question are great opportunities.
We'd also love to hear from you. Which expression feels most useful right now? Would you, I'd like, or I'd rather? Tell us in the comments and create your own example sentence.
Let's quickly review. In this section, we learned how it helps us make polite requests, ask for help, order things politely, and express preferences naturally. These are some of the most common real-life uses of would, and mastering them will make your English sound much more friendly and confident.
All right, now let's explore another important use of would that native speakers use when talking about the past and describing repeated actions.
This next section will help you understand conversations, stories, and personal memories much more easily.
Welcome back. We've already learned how to use would for imaginary situations, polite requests, and preferences. Now let's look at another very common use that often surprises English learners.
That's right, we're going to talk about using would to describe repeated actions in the past. Native speakers use this all the time when telling stories and sharing memories.
Think about your childhood. There were probably things you did again and again. The structure is simple, subject plus would plus base verb, but this time, we're talking about repeated past actions.
Here are some examples. When I was a kid, I would ride my bike every afternoon. My grandmother would make homemade bread every Sunday. We would visit our cousins every summer. My friends and I would play soccer after school.
Notice something important. These are not imaginary situations. These things actually happened in the past. We're simply describing habits or repeated actions.
Let me give you a personal example. When I was younger, I would stay up late reading books under a blanket with a flashlight.
That's a great one. When I was a child, I would spend hours drawing cartoons and making up stories.
Listeners, think about your childhood for a moment. What would you do after school? What games would you play? What food would you eat most often? Try answering out loud.
And if you'd like extra practice, leave one childhood memory in the comments using would. For example, when I was a child, I would visit my grandparents every weekend.
Here's another thing you'll hear in conversations. People often use would when telling stories. For example, every morning my dad would wake up before sunrise. He would make coffee, read the newspaper, and then go for a walk.
That's a very natural storytelling style. Instead of repeating used to again and again, native speakers often switch to would.
And that brings us to an important comparison. Many learners ask, what's the difference between would and used to?
Great question. For repeated past actions, both can often work. For example, I used to play soccer after school. I would play soccer after school. Both sound natural.
However, would is usually used when the past situation has already been established. For example, when I was 10 years old, I would spend every Saturday at the park. The listener already knows we're talking about the past.
Exactly, and here's an important tip. We normally don't use would for past states. For example, I would be shy when I was a child. That sounds unnatural. Instead say, I used to be shy when I was a child.
That's one of those details that can really improve your English. Use would for repeated actions. Use used to for states, conditions, or situations.
Now let's talk about sounding natural and polite with would. Many native speakers use would because it sounds less direct. Compare these sentences. Help me with this. Would you help me with this?
The second sentence feels friendlier. Your tone matters too. Even a polite structure can sound rude if spoken aggressively.
That's true. English communication often depends on both words and delivery. A calm voice combined with would usually sounds respectful and cooperative.
Here's a real-life situation. Imagine you're in an office. You could say, send me the report. Or, would you send me the report when you have a chance?
Most people would choose the second version because it sounds professional and considerate.
Let's do a mini practice together. I'll give a direct sentence. You change it into a polite sentence using would. Ready? Open the door.
Would you open the door, please?
Nice, give me your phone number.
Would you give me your phone number?
Great, explain this again.
Would you explain this again, please?
Excellent work. Listeners, try saying these answers out loud. The more you practice speaking, the more natural these patterns become.
Another useful situation is giving opinions gently. Instead of saying, that's a bad idea, you could say, I wouldn't do that.
That's a fantastic example. Native speakers often use would to sound less harsh. For example, I wouldn't spend that much money. I wouldn't worry too much. I wouldn't make that decision right away.
Notice how these sound like friendly advice rather than criticism. That's one reason would is such a powerful word.
Before we finish this section, let's review the key structures. Would for past habits. When I was young, I would play outside every day. Would for polite communication. Would you help me? Would for gentle opinions. I wouldn't do that.
And remember, context is everything. The same word can have different meanings depending on the situation.
Exactly. That's why listening to real conversations is so valuable. The more examples you hear, the easier it becomes to understand which meaning of would is being used.
Now let's move on to something every learner experiences, mistakes. Don't worry, we've all made them and they're a normal part of learning.
Let's look at some common mistakes with would and learn how to fix them so your English sounds even more natural.
Oh, we've definitely made our share of language mistakes over the years. I remember learning another language and accidentally saying things that made people laugh. Not because they were terrible mistakes, but because they sounded funny.
Same here, and that's why we want you to know that mistakes are completely normal. In fact, if you're making mistakes, it usually means you're practicing and improving.
Let's start with mistake number 1, using would without a reason or context. For example, I would go to the store. Many learners stop there.
Grammatically, it's possible, but native speakers usually expect more information. A better version might be, I would go to the store if it weren't raining, or I would go to the store but I'm busy.
The word would often suggests a condition, possibility, preference, or situation. Without context, the sentence can feel incomplete.
Here's a quick practice prompt. Complete this sentence. I would travel more if, say your answer out loud.
Mistake number 2, using would instead of will. Incorrect, tomorrow I would call you. Correct, tomorrow I will call you.
This mistake happens because learners know both words relate to the future. But remember, will is usually for future facts, decisions, and plans. Would often involves imagination, conditions, politeness, or past perspectives.
Think about it this way. Tomorrow I will call you, that's a real future plan. Tomorrow I would call you if I had your number, that's conditional.
Much better. Now mistake number 3, using would with another past marker unnecessarily. Incorrect, yesterday I would go to the mall. Correct, yesterday I went to the mall.
We don't use would for a single completed action in the past. Instead, use the simple past tense. Would works for repeated past habits or special situations.
Compare these. Yesterday I went to the gym. When I was younger I would go to the gym every morning. The second sentence describes a repeated habit.
Now for mistake number 4, using would for past states. Incorrect, when I was a child I would be shy. Correct, when I was a child I used to be shy.
Remember our rule, repeated actions, would can work, states or conditions, used to is usually better.
Here's a funny example. Imagine someone says, when I was a child I would have brown hair. It sounds strange because hair color is a state, not a repeated action.
Exactly, a better sentence is, when I was a child I used to have brown hair.
Let's practice which is correct. When I was young I would play basketball every weekend. Or when I was young I would be tall.
The first one is correct because playing basketball is an action.
If you've made any of these mistakes before, don't worry. Most English learners have. The important thing is noticing the pattern and practicing the correct form.
Every mistake is actually useful feedback. The more you practice, the more natural these structures will become, and soon you'll start using would automatically in real conversations.
Alright everyone, it's time for our interactive practice activity. This is where you get to test what you've learned today.
And remember, don't just listen. Try to answer out loud before we explain the answer. Speaking is one of the best ways to build confidence and fluency.
Let's play a simple game called Choose the Correct Sentence. Situation number 1. You are ordering food at a restaurant. Option A, I want a salad. Option B, I'd like a salad please. Which one sounds more natural and polite?
The better answer is option B, I'd like a salad please. Option A isn't wrong, but option B sounds more polite and is what native speakers commonly use when ordering food.
Great job if you chose option B. Now let's try another one. Situation number 2. You want your friend to help you move some boxes. Option A, help me move these boxes. Option B, would you help me move these boxes?
Option B is the better choice. Would you help me move these boxes? It sounds friendly and respectful. Remember, would often makes requests softer and more polite.
Excellent. Situation number 3. You're imagining a different life. Option A, I would live near the ocean if I had the chance. Option B, I will live near the ocean if I had the chance. Which one works?
Option A is correct. We're talking about an imagined situation, so we use would. I would live near the ocean if I had the chance.
Nice work. Situation number 4. You're talking about a childhood habit. Option A, when I was 10 I would play outside every day. Option B, when I was 10 I would be very happy. Which sentence uses would correctly?
Option A, playing outside, is a repeated action. The second sentence describes a state, so we'd normally say, when I was 10 I used to be very happy.
Great. Situation number 5. You're choosing between 2 weekend activities. Option A, I'd rather stay home and read. Option B, I'd like stay home and read.
Option A is correct. We say, I'd rather stay home and read. Remember, would rather is used for preferences.
Let's add a few variations. For a very casual conversation with friends you might say, I'd rather stay home tonight. For a more formal situation, you could say, I would prefer to stay home tonight.
Both are correct, the difference is mainly tone and formality.
Now here's a challenge for you. Create one sentence using would for an imaginary situation, create one sentence using I'd like, and create one sentence using I'd rather. Say them out loud right now.
Even better, write them in the comments. This kind of active practice helps you remember what you've learned much longer.
And don't worry if your sentence isn't perfect. The goal is communication. The more you practice, the more natural these structures will feel.
Exactly, real conversations aren't about perfection. They're about expressing your ideas clearly and confidently.
Well done, everyone. You've completed the practice section and used several of the most common patterns with would.
And that's exactly how fluency grows, one conversation, one sentence, and one practice session at a time.
While we've covered a lot today, let's quickly review everything you've learned about would in real conversations.
We focused on 3 major uses. First, using would for imaginary or conditional situations. For example, I would travel more if I had more free time. Second, using would for polite requests and preferences. For example, would you help me? Or, I'd like a coffee, please. Third, using would for repeated actions in the past. For example, when I was a child, I would play outside every evening.
If you can use those 3 patterns comfortably, your English will already sound much more natural. And remember, progress doesn't come from memorizing hundreds of grammar rules. It comes from hearing, using, and practicing real English regularly.
That's such an important point. Every time you listen to English, speak English, or write a sentence in English, you're building stronger language habits.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every fluent speaker has made thousands of them. The important thing is to keep practicing and keep communicating.
Before we finish, here's a question for you. Which use of would was most useful today? Was it imaginary situations, polite requests, preferences, or talking about past habits?
We'd love to hear your answer, so leave a comment below. And while you're there, write one original sentence using would. Challenge yourself to use something from today's lesson.
You might be surprised by how much you remember once you start creating your own examples.
If you enjoyed this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to Fluent English. Sharing the episode helps more learners improve their English, and subscribing means you'll never miss a future lesson.
We truly appreciate every one of you who listens, comments, practices, and learns with us each week.
Keep speaking, keep learning, and keep believing in your progress. You're improving every single day, even when it doesn't feel like it.
Thanks so much for spending this time with us. Take care, keep practicing your English, and we'll be back soon with another lesson to help you sound more confident and natural. See you next time.